Lesley. I thought that talk was brilliant, and it was just when I was having a cup of tea there was something that you said that has answered the question I've had in my mind for the last year. How did Iceland possibly manage to beat England? But with 50% of the DNA coming from Scotland, that made a lot of sense. So, first question, Gordon's got a microphone, so...
Come on, don't be shy. Yeah. And you can ask about the BBC, right? You know, it's all right. Well, there it goes.
Just a bit. I'd take it off the bottom of the mic stand. I just left the wire off.
That's all right, when you go.
Right. Topical question. What did you think of Alex's show on RT?
I've actually been so busy organising this Arctic Forum that I haven't seen it. I saw today there were a few problems with the tweets. Who saw it in here?
You.
Oh my gosh, right, okay. Well, actually, that's still about half, but I mean, that's more than RT has ever probably had. Watching it in Scotland, at least. I don't know that it's I don't think it's such a great idea. I know myself, when I worked for BBC for a good while, and had a lot of arguments with them. I left basically because we just ended up having constant arguments about the content of what we were discussing. I mean, most of the way through the Iraq War, the production side were basically trying to discuss litter and dog shit because it got more people phoning up than the war that we were in the middle of. And that was partly because the BBC had bottled it if you remember, the dodgy dossier, Greg Dyke walking the plank. That was the end of the BBC, seriously. That guy was great, much as he may have had different politics, all the rest of it. He was a bonny fechter, he really was for the Bee. And he believed in very vigorous journalism. And as soon as the Bee lost that battle with the government, it just pulled all its news and current affairs way, way, way inside the park. Never wanted to get close to the edge of that argument again. And I know, because I was working Radio Scotland for that whole period, it was just constant arguments as you could begin to feel. It didn't even need edicts from London. This is not the way things work. People internalise. I just moved cats. I've moved house and have 3 cats. If I'm nervous, they're nervous. This is how things work. You know, the full staff at BBC Scotland just needed to get the vibe and just began to pull back enormously from things. So it was difficult to get very vigorous programmes going. I left and became an independent for about 1.5 years or 2 years, and by gum did I learn pretty quickly how hard it is to do good programmes as an independent. And that was even when I had 20 years broadcasting experience, and the people I was working with had broadcasting experience. Now, I'm not trying to be funny, but it's very hard. You can talk about having radical, different programming, and you can always have a good launch programme because everyone puts the most energy they've got into their first programme. The 2nd, the 5th, the 22nd, the 30th. It's quite hard to keep that standard up. And I wonder, because I also think Alex is connected to the bid to to take over control of Johnson Press. This is Johnson Press that owns the Scotsman, as well as Scottish local papers, Yorkshire Post, a lot of titles in England. And as you may know, there's a Norwegian businessman who wants to take over the board and install Alex as chairman of the board. Now, I don't know, but I think that's, I know he's a bit of a superhuman, but I think that's enough for one lifetime, really. And making a go of that is really important, because I think the plan is to relocate Johnson Press headquarters as a company from England to Scotland. And what a brilliant thing that would be. We've seen so much going the other way. That's a really important thing to do. But if I was an employee of Johnson Press, or if I was a shareholder or something like that, I'm not a shareholder in anything except community energy companies, but, you know, I would be sort of wondering how much attention Alex would be paying when he's got to put so much energy into breathing life into that programme. So it wouldn't be my priority for him. My priority for him would be actually the Johnson Press thing. And I think that the RT thing will end up being an energy sink. And of course, there's a whole battery of people waiting for the first mistakes. The first tweets that quite obviously weren't sent by other human beings and were passed off as such. You know, the first time you take shortcuts, you've had it. People smell a rat, you know, and when you've gone through journalist training, you know you can't do, you know, there's lots of times we could have done shortcuts like that and never can succumb to that, because, you know, the audience can hear the same way as the cats know you're nervous. So I don't think it's a good move, but I haven't seen it. What do you think, folks? What do you think, Andy?
I don't know what the fuss was about.
Sorry?
I don't know what the fuss was about, to be perfectly honest.
Which way? Either way?
Yeah, well, but I mean, the way you're sort of saying it's not a good move from, and a lot of other people had said, you know, give the sort of negative investment, but when you saw the programme, it's not the right overweight, you know, I just don't see what the fuss was about.
Well, I think that's the problem. If you want to make a change or a difference somewhere, you have to figure out you have to figure out what skills you've got, what opportunities there are. And the thing that I've always admired Alex Salmond about is that he's been a very good gambler, I mean, in many respects. For example, I mean, the way that he created an energy revolution in Scotland was really very impressive. I know there's lots of people who don't like wind turbines, but we've moved to a situation where 7% of Scotland are pretty happy with renewable energy, and we're well on the way to being European leaders in this, actually. Of course, we need to match up the intermittent energy we've got with base load, which is what Iceland's got, for example. If we could connect that as a massive piece of engineering, it would be one of the most ambitious and forward-looking things we've ever done. And that started with Alex Salmond putting all his cards on that square. So I hugely admire that. But I think he's put all his cards in the wrong square here, because it's tempting. Television is seductive and empty and hollow. Believe me. For most people.
Is it long-term for
I can't hear you. You just think it's going to shut
Is it a long-term exercise, Valley, or is it short-term?
I don't know, but I mean, I really don't know. I was on his show that he did. Did people go to see his show in the Edinburgh Festival? It wasn't scintillating.
The one question I wanted to ask you, Lesley, you're around the marketplace quite a lot. You're talking all over the place. You must get a feel as to the mood of the country. Are we moving in the right direction to get independence? Are you getting any vibes from corners of the country that we could be making strides in that direction?
Well, there's sort of 3 levels to that. One is ourselves, the yesers, if you like. Astonishing. What are we like? We're still here. Dogged, too small a word. You know, it's extraordinary how tenacious the 45 have become. And look at you as well, I'm not trying to be funny, but earlier we were talking about Facebook and Twitter. You're all on social media now, practically. You know, we were talking about the Indie app. One gentleman was sort of bold enough to say, I'm not sure I can just exactly about that. 5-10 years ago, would we have had that level of savvy about that? No, because we knew we had to get in there because we weren't really being represented in the mainstream media. So you don't know what muscles you've built. You know, as a group of people, the other thing is, you look at all sorts of community issues and whatever, and every time something has to be picked up and run with, it's yes people who are doing it. Because actually, once you've had to marshal your energies once collectively, it's not so difficult to do the same thing again. And actually, over time, that really makes quite a difference, because everybody sees, I'm sorry to make these kind of analogies, because this might sound a little bit like Greg's sausage roll, but you are disciples. people judge the future Scotland on you as much as anything, and lots of people are beginning to get involved in lots of issues, which is great. Across Scotland, there are groups like you, and you're right, I'm lucky enough to see it. There was 150 a couple of weeks ago. There was an extraordinary week where there was about 150 turned up on a wet Monday into noon, and their forward shop was the first one. I'm sure there's an argument about that, but it was opened in September the 19th, and they've been going ever since. You know, they're still plugging away. Denny, I mean, how many folk have been in Denny? Right, as many people as been in the blooming Faroe Islands, right? Look, Denny was absolutely stowed out in a Baptist church because the minister's a yeser. Dunbar, I'll get there last. Dunbar, exactly the same, you know, all of these areas, people are coming out in absolute droves. It is almost quasi-religious. Maybe it's because there's so many churches involved, but I mean, people have got a kind of, it's almost like a need to get reoriented to the scripture, slightly. So that's one thing. We are pretty there, although I don't think we're necessarily as organised as we could be. The Scottish Independence Convention should be doing some of that. It's not, partly because there's a bit of an argument about direction, and partly because it's got no money. So you can come back to that if you want. The other thing, though, is it doesn't really matter. It's good that we are pretty solid, but of course, that's not enough to get over the line. Well, it depends entirely at what point the referendum is held, because if we have EU nationals allowed to vote, if we have 16 to 17-year-olds allowed to vote, someone has calculated that if we get 90% of EU nationals voting yes, we would have been over the line last time. I think there's a pretty high likelihood that EU nationals will be voting yes this time, but who knows. Then there's the other group. This is the group that the recent Build conference that the SIC held was interested in and did some research about. The 15% of sort of switherers. And what they found that is actually you could take even from focus groups they did and so on, you could take even 20% of people who had voted no but were sort of open to things. And actually they were very open to the idea of independence, but they had a couple of things to say. One was, in fact the biggest one they had to say, was last time round, there were very tangible, some might say lies or assertions put forward by the no side. You will not get a pension. You will not, Vaseline will close, there will be all these jobs lost. These things will happen. But the response from the yes side tended to be more abstract. Scotland will be fairer. There will be social justice. We will be more equal. And what they were saying was, we want to hear an alternative plan with jobs related to it. And actually, that's not a bad point. I mean, as you may have got by now, I'm pretty motivated about energy, for example. If we controlled energy policy, you're damn right we would have got our interconnectors going. We would be talking to Norway directly now about joining up the European grid, the green grid that's being built in the North Sea. We'd be talking to the Icelanders. We'd be using the fibre optic cables coming down to fibre optic all our islands and go 4G from the north down. It's mind-blowing what we could be doing, and it's jobs, 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 all of it, and they're not shitty jobs. You know, they're good jobs. But we didn't tackle it this way necessarily, and the groups that were spoken to wanted to hear that kind of tangible achievements of independence this time. They've got that it'll be fairer and everything. I mean, my God, how could it not be? So we don't need to keep banging that drum. They've heard that bit. They also, they don't want, neither yes, people who voted yes don't want an immediate referendum. What was found was that people found the first one so upsetting at the point of losing it that folk are reluctant to go through that again unless it's a pretty good hope of winning it. And no folk did find it divisive. They do find now that there are, there's two sides in communities and so on, and that's true to an extent. So what the no people were saying was, when we've heard what Brexit's about, when we see what a mess they've made of it, when you've got a plan that's got numbers on it and jobs, come back, we're here. And that's kind of interesting. Another thing that they came up with was facts. Well, you know, are obviously Giles at one a ding, but what is that? People don't regard facts as necessarily, okay, it's stuff that comes from the dreaded mainstream media, and it's probably important to rebut them, but all that does is bring you back to neutral. What people really rate is if their boss says to them, Brexit will be a disaster and half our jobs will be lost, that's a fact. That, in fact, seems to come up as the highest order fact you can have. And people seem to be a bit sort of inured to hearing more huge amounts of millions of pounds this way and millions of pounds that way. That didn't really move them. But if there was respected members of their lives or their communities who had strong opinions about it, they tended to regard that as fact. And you're the community. You know, so there's a third thing, and they tended to judge what an independent Scotland would be like on how well we are currently running public services. Now, you know, obviously, there's been stuff that's come in on time and under budget, but there's also problems in the health service and in schools. I mean, we know there are. So people are looking at that, and I think they're making judgments not just on what level of problem there is, but what level of honesty there is about it. So that's something the movement can do nothing about. You know, that is in the control of the SNP, and of course, you could make the argument that you can't start to shift big pots of money when all the levers are elsewhere and you haven't got control of them. But actually, sometimes there are just arguments about what's being done, and that's hard always to just say, it's white and white's black. So those were the things people had found. Now, you know, that was a statistically representative group of people that took some time to find, and the object is to keep trying to find out what they think a bit more. But if all those things are right, then actually the Scottish Government has got a lot to do, and it's hard, no matter how much the other groups like Commonweal has got an alternative white paper. Lots of people have published books about currencies, but until the Scottish Government puts a stamp on something and decides what tilt it's going to take, it won't have the shape of a plan. And I don't know if the SNP are listening to any of our findings or not. So it's hard to know. And of course, people feel like they should be out doing stuff, you know, should be out personally in barricades or whatever it is, or, you know, on stalls, and possibly that's quite good. Actually, people still see you're there. That doggedness is not nothing. But I think also the SIC should be actually supplying people with a bit more in the way of daily rebuttals. You know, you do get such constant arguments, and I don't think we are putting out a different independence perspective, because the SNP is trying to prove it's doing the day job. Well, if it wants to do the day job, that's fine, and I can see the point in that. But actually, it could let somebody else have a little bit of space and a bit of cash to do the other one, you know. And so far, that's not forthcoming. Long answer, short questions. But what do you think?
No answer.
But what do you think?
Well, I'm a bit of a I'm sort of glass half full. And I'm very optimistic, because we started, I think, in the last little referendum with about 8%, and we ended up at 45%. It was a fantastic achievement. And I think we lost it because you touched on the economy. I hope they're addressing that. Let's talk about having the bank. It is something really positive. They talk about the electricity grid, having your own company to keep prices at a good level. That's also positive stuff. And I think that the SNP, by and large, are doing a fairly decent job in Scotland with all the positive things they're doing, with prescription charges, tuition fees, and yeah, they have trouble with the health service. But you can't keep reducing budgets and spending the same and achieving the same. And that happens in education as well. So they're sort of moving money around and they're not getting all the money they should be getting. And My argument to the people I talk to is, look what we're doing. What could we do if we had all the cash?